viewers who are watching this program would love to see Gary Schofield here, because they always say, where is he? Where is the legend? He's still around, but sadly, I mean, people joke and say, Featherstone, they haven't got electricity yet. It's still the 1970s. Scully hasn't got Wi-Fi or broadband. So
we went to great lengths to invite him on this edition. He's got lots to say at the moment, and I have to say I do still speak to him virtually every day, and said to him, "Are you coming on the show?" And he went, "Yeah, I'll get somebody to set me up." And he went, "But I haven't got Wi-Fi." And you won't be on the show then, will you?
I mean, this is why there was the British Podcast Awards at the weekend. We didn't enter because A, you have to pay, and B, this is the kind of shambolic start to the programme. People listening to this will be going, what's going on? We're back for the first time in a while. I have to be honest. Usually when I'm working 6 days a week or whatever, I can't wait to get there on a Monday, do the show. At the moment, while there's nothing going on, that's a bit flat. But Super League is back. Hopefully, unless everyone goes on strike in a couple of weeks' time. John Davidson is here. Phil is here as ever. The new issue of Forty20 magazine is also here. If I can get it on camera. There it is. St Helens 5-2 favourites to win the grand final, according to the sponsors. Fred's even written in the magazine this month.
He's looking forward to everything coming back.
We are. Where should we start? Because there's plenty of things that have happened since we last spoke.
None of us have been to a barber, to be fair.
No. Some people didn't enjoy our last show, but I thought it was important and we did it. And again, thanks to Sophie Robinson for coming on and speaking so eloquently, proving that there are people in the world of rugby league who know how to speak. It was interesting, the story on the 4020.news website of the weekend about people being warned about their social media usage. I must have missed what was tweeted. But geez, people need to... but they all have agents, these players, and we know they know how to copy and paste tweets because they do it quite often. Why do they tweet anyway? Why can't someone do it for them so they don't say anything daft? I don't know.
Rich, as the John Bateman, Isaac Moses episode has showed, agents are a great force.
He's coming back to Wigan. That was one of the things that's happened.
Yeah, for less money. Yeah.
But he wants to come back to his family. It's okay.
Oh right, is that what's happened? Okay, yeah.
That's. Well, don't deny the story. That's the official line. You can't come out and say that's not true.
So why did he ask for more money week before the grand final last year? And why was he asking him for a release when his agent was touting him all over the NRL? New agents.
This is why people have missed us, because we're straight in there, a minute into the programme, and already debunking the lines we're told.
I think there's a bigger issue.
That's the funny thing, Rich. A lot of people seem happy to swallow whatever they're told, but there often is a deeper story there that is worth looking at.
I think John's right that there's a question mark about the money that he could have got, that he thought he was going to get, the gamble that he may have played by putting himself on the open market that's now seen him not on that open market. But there's also another story about what is Super League going to look like in terms of transfers here. And whilst it is officially being played down and denied, and understandably so, and you always want to get out a good news story before perhaps a bad news one follows it, I am yet to be convinced that somebody needs to make way for John Bateman arriving at Wigan. And that's not a Wigan problem. It's not a Wigan issue. It's a whole sport issue. And that everybody who seems to be moving or on the verge of moving or asking for a transfer or putting in a request, it's almost as if we're playing a Rubik's Cube, because nobody has got any money. So for everyone who's coming in, there's one going out. Now, I suspect, and John is informed, whereas mine is pure guesswork, that Jackson Hastings is not going to be at Wigan after the end of this year, and that John Bateman is effectively taking Jackson Hastings' contract. And one of the reasons for that, even if Wigan have an amount of salary cap left over from some players who won't be there or who will be retiring at the end of this season, is that nobody has any money for a serious signing at the moment. And I can understand why NRL clubs would want Jackson Hastings. He's a very talented player, and you look at 3 or 4 of the ones that are clearly lacking a rudder at the moment would be interested in him. He has a clause in his contract to enable him to go back to the NRL as and when an offer comes in. Rumours already that New Zealand Warriors have an option on him should he want to go back to the NRL. But I think it's purely a question of economics, and if you are going to bring somebody of the value of John Bateman in, someone of that similar value will have to go out. And I think it's the same at Salford. Niall Evans has gone, Morgan Escaray's coming in. It's the same going to be at Castleford, that Jordan Rankin's gone. The likelihood is Niall Evans will be coming in. There's a possibility that Mike McMeekin will be going to Catalan. There's a chance that Liam Sutcliffe will be going in to replace him. It's all of that. We're moving around players. We're not really adding to Super League. But I think the bigger issue is we're going to lose some of our juniors, and be very interested to, again, know what John thinks about the signing of the likes of Harry Rushton at Canberra, the fact that Melbourne have already put out feelers to Ethan Havard. The worry for me is that our crop of really, really talented youngsters who are cheap by comparison and who there probably won't be a transfer fee for could all end up in the NRL.
You read my mind, Phil, because I was going to read out a tweet last night from Tyrone McCarthy, the Salford backer, who obviously spent some time in the Queensland Cup and in the NRL with St George Illawarra, and he tweeted about the Harry Rushton signing from Wigan to Canberra. A sign of things to come, I believe. The question that needs to be asked is, what are we offering our young players to stay in the game in the UK, and is that attractive enough? ? I think you make an excellent point, Phil, and I think the recent success of Bateman, Williams, and obviously there are others, has certainly alerted more NRL clubs to the talent that's in the UK. And I believe Wigan paid £200,000 for John Bateman, so they're not going to do that again. NRL clubs are being hit hard by COVID, as well as every other sporting club in every sport. So they're going to look for ways to circumvent that and to get them younger. Much like, I can't remember which Burgess it was because there's so many of them, but one of the twins went to South Sydney before he'd actually played in Super League, and obviously he turned out, very well. So if you can get them at 18, 19, put them in either the under-20s or a New South Wales or Queensland Cup, train them for a year or two, you may have a ready-made player who's also adjusted to life in Australia. I don't think there's going to be 10 or 20 of these players picked up in the next 1 or 2, but it probably will be a handful, and that is an issue. But on the flip side of that, it should make the England Test team a lot stronger. And considering England or Great Britain hasn't won a series for 50 years or a World Cup for that long, then that actually may be a good thing. So it's a bit of catch-22, I would say.
I'm just a little bit concerned that clearly there's issues with participation, because it could be a year before kids will be able to play in any sort of competitive environment. And talking to people in other sports about retention, it was hard anyway, particularly in team sports, to get young people interested in regularly attending. But the other thing now is, if they don't play competitive sport for a year, then not only have you missed a very important year of their development, but the other thing is that you may never get them back into a scholarship type system. And not only will we lose maybe some of our top young talent, but will there be in our academy structures talent of a similar standard coming in at the bottom end? And you can't address every issue at the moment. And I have every sympathy for the governing body, who's being accused of not making the kind of decisions that I certainly wouldn't like to be making. I have every sympathy with club owners who are faced with the issue of keeping the club going whilst also keeping a group of employees happy. I have every sympathy with the players who are being offered reductions when actually we all know and have said for years and years and years they're not paid enough in the first place for the job that they do. I have every sympathy with fans who are having season ticket money They've been asked to make choices, and it's an impossible choice. You want to support your club, but you may not be able to because of the personal circumstances that you're in, and it feels a little bit like, through nobody's fault, an emotional blackmail situation. So I have sympathy with everybody, but I just have a real concern that if our best young talent is going to the NRL and we haven't got as many young kids playing the game to replace them, to find the next generation of young talent, we could be in trouble a bit further down the line.
Well, we'll stick with transfers at the moment because, as we know, that's what gets hits and clicks apparently these days. So we've got John Bateman's coming back. Niall Evalds is off to he's off to Castleford. Morgan Escaray off to Salford. You mentioned Jackson Hastings. He was linked with Harlequins at one point, wasn't he? Was that is that another agent being mischievous and trying to get Union to bump up his?
I think Sean Long might have had a word in his ear or alerted.
They've got enough problems of their own with, was it Eddie Jones is being courted by the NRL, and Coventry Rugby Union have released half of their staff today, so they won't be making any major signings that have any element of risk attached to them. As
you've mentioned him, and I'll get back to transfers in a moment then, Eddie Jones, is he going to be in the NRL anytime soon, John?
I'm not sure. I know I think he's always harbored an ambition to coach in the NRL. I know that one of his ex-players who's still very close with him told me that. And he's a big rugby league fan. He grew up in the South Sydney area. I think he's a Rabbitohs fan, and he's used a lot of rugby league players and signed them, but he's also used a lot of rugby league coaches and staff, and Jason Rolls is joining his staff at the end of the year. So I think, it's been an ambition. Whether it comes off or not, it is a big ask. And you'd think you'd have to have some fairly good assistance in with him. But yeah, I think there's definitely, feelers being put out. And it looks like Dean Pay is gone at Canterbury and Trent Barrett's in, so it won't be at the Bulldogs.
Unless they were a pair, I could see Eddie Jones coming in as the guy in the dressing room who bangs the table and motivates the team, and Trent Barrett being there as his head coach, if you like, because Barrett obviously has some coaching deficiencies or lack of experience in certain areas. So that could be a marriage.
Could be a marriage.
Heard it here first.
I don't think Eddie's the sort of character to necessarily delegate. I think he likes to do it his own way, and his way goes. So, yeah, I mean, it's not unheard of. Alan Jones, the, I suppose, right-wing nutter radio host, but he was a rugby union. He was the Wallabies coach before that. He went to Balmain and South Sydney quite unsuccessfully, although he had a lot of success as a rugby union coach. He did go in the 90s to coach rugby league, so it has been done before in Australia.
We've got enough right-wing nutter radio.
Subject of coaches in the NRL, clearly the other position that is up for grabs is New Zealand Warriors. Sean Wayne being linked with the job, as in the down to the last three, and he's believed to be one of them if all the scuttlebutt coming from the NRL is to be believed. That would, should he be appointed or be interested, it wouldn't rule him out of still being the England coach because the previous incumbent did it part-time, but it would be a massive turnaround from the RFL saying one of the reasons we wanted Sean Wayne in our operation to start with because we wanted him to be full-time and the position to be full-time. So could you see him going over to the Shaky Isle?
Yeah, I could. I think he's always wanted to coach in the NRL. He's appointed an Australian agent to try and get his name out there, and I think he would. I think it'd be interesting. I think it'd be a good fit. He's that kind of hard-nosed sort of coach, built around effort and defence, and I think he could work. Whether the Warriors is the right club, it's hard to say. They've got a lot of issues with their roster, and obviously it's a very unique club because of the location. It's the only one in New Zealand. It's a little bit different, but look, I think it'd be really interesting if he did get appointed, just to see how he went, because we all know how well Malcolm really did in the 90s. I'm not surprised. I'm surprised they haven't put a statue up of him in Newcastle because he's a legend of that town. And it goes to show there is a lot of talent and coaching in the UK, and why shouldn't it transfer?
Both England men's national rugby coaches potentially moving to the NRL. Someone who will be on the move, it seems, is Liam Sutcliffe, who's done the bizarre thing in a pandemic and when everyone's cutting costs of handing in a transfer request at the Leeds Rhinos. I put out the hypothetical on Twitter yesterday. In 2015, Brian McDermott made him the linchpin of his side because Kevin Sinfield was going off to rugby union for that massively successful spell there. And of course, Sutcliffe gets injured, Sinfield's back in the side, they win everything, make a film, and we all know what happens from there. He now looks like he's on his way out of Headingley, Phil.
Interestingly, you put in a transfer request intimates that somebody needs to pay a transfer fee for him if they want him, because clearly he's got a year left of his current contract. I don't think anybody can afford a transfer fee. So the question will be, does it suit all parties that a player leaves at this time? And I think you can make a case for saying that, forget Leeds at the moment, if every club, I mean, we can talk till the cows come home about who's going to win Super League and what the sport's going to look like and when normality might resume. But the issue for every one of the clubs, be they Super League, Championship or League One, is survival at the moment. And it's the same in every sport, no matter, probably the Premiership is the only thing that is immune from it in soccer, but every single sport is undergoing this realisation that the financial model they've been working on for too long in a professional era has been built on sand. And that the first resumption that they've had for what is a relatively short period of time, when you look at the amount of money that's been pumped in over a long period of time, meant that nobody had any reserves to fund it. So if you were to say that every single club in Super League at the moment had to shed a player to survive who was one of the higher earner players, you'd also say at this time every club has got to look to promote its youngsters, because economically, again, that is what every club needs to do. So there's some talented kids who are going to get a chance because we're playing a lot of games, but some of these kids now need to become first team regulars. So if all of those factors come into play, and you look at Leeds as a specific case, and you say, well, what position at the moment do they have the best covering and the best kids coming through? It's probably the back row. And even though Liam would like to be a number 6, the likelihood is that he is a second row or a loose forward, I would say. And Leeds bought Alex Mellor in a position that he plays. The Reece Martin is not only one of their best players, but has taken over the goal kicking role. There's an issue about perhaps do they and can they keep Stevie Ward? Well, maybe if Liam Sutcliffe was to leave, that makes the decision on whether you keep Stevie Ward slightly easier to bear. They've got a couple of really good kids who need a chance. Alex Sutcliffe did fantastically at Featherstone and plays in exactly the same position as Liam. And there's a young kid called Sam Walters who played for the England Academy a couple of years ago, was going to go on loan to Bradford till COVID struck. Well, he looks again like he could make it, but he needs the opportunity to play at that level. There's probably others. So I think for Leeds, somebody in a position where they have the luxury of being able to say, we can let you go, might suit them. I think Liam is struggling from being a utility player, and he needs to go to a club where he can be a first choice in a specific position. That isn't going to happen at Leeds, so that suits him to say, I've given it everything I can, but I need to now reinvigorate myself. And it gives the chance for a youngster to claim a place higher up the pecking order. So to me, again, a bit like the Bateman and Hastings thing, it might just suit everybody.
And Leeds, John, were a club who, we had that story a couple of weeks ago that they were interesting. Ben Curry from Warrington, he's obviously staying there now. I wonder if that Leeds have been sensible enough. I don't know what they offered Curry or didn't, or what Warrington did, but Leeds are sensible enough at the moment not to bring in anyone high profile in terms of, and we'll move on to this now, clubs are bringing in high profile players and then asking their current staff to take pay cuts. It doesn't kind of add up, does it?
No, definitely not. I think you wouldn't, if you're a player, you wouldn't want to be coming off contract this year or, trying to be negotiating, because everything looking ahead, this sort of situation is going to last for some time. And two things that came to my mind. I was talking to someone last week, and they were, mentioning how there's, at least one player that I know of in League One who's on 35 grand a year, who only trains twice a week or part time. You've got players in Super League who are full time, 2 divisions up, on 20 or grand less. I mean, that's not sustainable when you're a League One club and you're getting 500 fans, and you're not getting any money, for your TV rights. I think the model, and as Phil said earlier, I think professional sport in general is the model is crumbling, or it's not being particularly solid. And the other thing is talking about TV rights. I mean, there's been nothing about the TV, the Sky TV, the Super League TV deal being up next year. I mean, that surely now is a real worry that they might have got the same as what the deal was last time at the start of the year, but now News Corp's going to be under a lot of pressure. And if you look at, I'll just use a quick example in Australia, the A-League, which is the elite football soccer competition, has basically had its TV rights cut down by a fifth. Super Rugby, or Rugby Australia, the rugby union equivalent, I think they're worth now $10 million, which is a massive cut. So for Super League, for Rugby League, I think in the UK, I hope it's not the case, but I think we should be a bit worried.
There's an article, an interview which your colleague Ross Hebenstall did with Gareth Carvell, which is up on the rugbyleaguehub.com long reads Patreon site. Headline of which, historically there is no trust between players and the clubs. That goes, that's in this sporting life it goes back to and beyond. But the interesting thing that immediately stands out, and Phil's right, the players compared to other people in sport or whatever don't get paid enough. But someone pointed out in the comment section under that story, just £65,000 a year is the average wage in Super League. And I think that just was a sarcastic just, because there's plenty of people out there who won't be earning anywhere near that in the real world at the minute, who'll be losing their jobs. We're in a fascinating situation in which hearts and minds are going to be on the line in a battle between club owners and players and their agents. Who is going to come out on top in the end, and who's going to come out looking the best from this?
I think the more you read about what we're going through in sport, and the more you take into account what's happening in every sport and try and move it away from just rugby league, the one thing that is going to happen is there's going to be change. And I think if we just think that whenever is physically safe to start going to matches again, it's all going to feel and look the same, it's clearly not. Nobody really knows what it's going to look like or feel like. But as John quite rightly pointed out, if you lose your major benefactor is clearly television money. So if that is reduced in any way whatsoever, or there aren't competing broadcasting rights holders out there, or even if the conventional way we've been watching television is not going to fund to the tune that it has in the past, then you have to look at where is the other money going to come from to supplement that, or do you go back to being a part-time sport? If the option is to go back to being predominantly, if not exclusively, a part-time sport, rugby league will still exist, but it'll be speedway in any other name, or greyhound racing, or
speedway. Rich.
all of the sports that had a higher profile not long ago didn't get a broadcasting deal commensurate with what they may have got a few years ago, and now struggle to get any sort of airtime whatsoever, and sponsorship deals on the back of that. The alternative,
if it went part time though, that wouldn't be the death of the sport, but it would be
it would be
relevant. I mean, there's no point having a World Cup or being involved in internationals if you're part-time and playing against full-time professionals.
It would be a minority sport for
even more so, yeah.
Time immemorial. The alternative is to get some kind of external investment, which in this day and age, bearing in mind that whilst we're all in a terrible crisis economically, it's never been easy to actually borrow money because the rates are so low. that there are corporate companies out there who are looking to invest in things that are at a very low level because the return is significantly higher. It's like if you buy shares now, if you're able to do it, the likelihood is if you can hold on to them for long enough, you'll make money out of them because they will go up. That's what tends to happen. So there are corporate companies out there, financiers, some based in America, some in London, who are looking to invest in sport. Now, it won't be across the board. They'll pick and choose where they can get the best return. Rugby League at the moment offers them a return, but what they'll want for their investment is not how the sport looks at the moment. And whether we like it or not, depending on, again, your standpoint of who you might support, a lot of the things we've talked about over the last few years on this program seem as though will become agenda items. So where you want the game to be played to get maximum return for your investors, you know, who is able to eat off the top table because they've got the backing and resource to do it. Whether you now look at a competition that is part-time and full-time and the two are kept separate but together under the same umbrella, all of those things are now in a melting pot to be debated. And whilst they were theoretical or hypothetical when we might have been talking about them originally, they're now reality. And I genuinely do think that things will change. And if Rugby League wants to survive, prosper and compete, then it can't look like it does at the moment. And whilst we may not have the time or the vision to actually tell everybody what it is going to look like, because I'm not sure we'll ever be involved in those discussions, I think those discussions are starting to be held.
NRL Europe, Phil.
Well, you know where you
get the Aussies to pay.
Well, it's just a licensing agreement. They don't have to pay anything. But if you come under the same banner, it is all so much easier to market. And if you were a corporate investor, and instead of investing in one competition where you know there is a less certain outcome, or you can invest in a brand that covers the globe already, half of which is already achieving great ratings and is getting kudos from people who aren't normally allied to that sport, then I'd be very interested in investing in a branded NRL product that covered both sides of the world. Absolutely, 100%.
We're still, and John, you're right about this enough, and you know I share your feelings on this, that the Rugby League media, not all of it, but has too many elements which are fantasists and dreamers and outright liars about things. We see people build up potential TV deals with a Championship and League One. Even before this pandemic, there was no sign of that whatsoever, despite what people were saying. As I point out in my column in 4020 this month, top flight Spanish football on free sports, not always Barcelona versus Real Madrid, of course, but the middling teams, 20 to 30,000 people watching for one of the top leagues in European football. There's got to be some realism come in now. Do you think there actually will be any realism come in, or will we all just go around playing the same tunes over and over again as we always seem to do?
No, I don't think there will be realism because it's kind of an inconvenient truth, and there's too many people invested, not necessarily for the wrong reasons, but they're that invested that they just don't want to accept the truth, even though it's staring them in the face. And I could point to numerous examples, which I won't do, but you can look. We mentioned the John Bateman thing, and I thought that was good. It is great for Super League that he's coming back. Don't get me wrong, but there is more to that story, and that sort of got lost in the whole cheerleading nature of it. And that's just an example, which you could look at 50 different examples. There was the look at. I think it was at Phil will know better than me, 1970 or 1972 Ashes, the last winning Ashes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, at the end of that piece, there was a point from Johnny Whiteley about why, the next Ashes series and how the gap could be getting bigger and, what needs to be done. That really should be the focus. Why has that drought been so long? And people just don't seem to want to address these things, or maybe they don't know how to. I don't know. But for me, there's a bit of convenient ignorance there. But But yeah, you talk about realism. If you look at the whole Championship and League One sort of fight to resume the season or for a decision, you've got people at massive loggerheads, in some ends of Championship and League One saying it'll be financial suicide if we start playing in front of closed doors, with no fans. And then you've got other, or a couple of clubs saying, this is an outrage, etc. So there's not even realism there. So yeah, I don't know what to say.
I think one of the other things to bear in mind in all of this debate about, people will hold on to the way things are at the moment and just assume that normal will resume as it did. There's one other cloud on the horizon financially, and it's going to affect every sport. And it's been hinted at even today in an interview with Tony Adams, who's stepping down this week as the president of the RFL, so the divine Claire can take over. And that is that there is no question that at some point in the not too distant future, betting industries will not be allowed to advertise at sporting events. And we've been through this before with cigarette and alcohol advertising. And yes, Rugby League sort of did pick up alternatives and stumble on. But if we were to lose upfront over betting income, we've nothing. So we have to make some decisions that will ensure that companies that aren't currently associated with the sport would become involved. Now we need to make some decisions about what we want to look like and what is our appeal to those companies. And at the moment, we haven't got that. We get Betfred, and Betfred is a great fit because it's a northern-based company who's looking to expand it from, the fifth biggest betting company in the country and slightly move up the ladder. We were the same with the financial institutions that we had. It was never a top one. It was always the one that was the fifth or sixth biggest, which was a fit with the sport. But if we are serious about surviving all this and getting new money into it and corporate backers, we have to have sponsors that are allied to that, financial institutions, car manufacturers that aren't bottom end. And to do
in the last 2 years, we haven't had any new sponsors at that
level. But I think that's because we don't appeal to the kind of sponsors that we're going to need. So if we want to be flat caps and whippets and we want to appeal to northern-based companies, we are the sport. You'll get to our people. If we want to be seen to be a sport that's progressive with teams in France and Canada and with an outlook that's innovative and maybe linked to what's happening in the NRL, pulling the seasons together a little bit, and again, get John's take on this in a minute, but I think there are some encouraging signs that even in the NRL, they're looking about what the length of the season should be, where Origin should be played. Does that leave more space for internationals? And they have the same issues with what sponsors they're going to need to bring on board in the future, and they've had their last big media payday, so how do they get another one further down the line? And I think there is a genuine reason to talk now more than there ever has been. So I think we are looking at a very, very different scenario if we can get 2020 out of the way. If we can all come through that with something that's still called Rugby League in a format that we recognise with the majority of the teams that we know and love in a viable format to at least go into 2021 with a World Cup at the end of it, there is hope. But do not expect it to look the same as it has done before the shutdown.
On the resumption of Championship and League One, it's interesting today to note that ice hockey, we always use as an example for some reason, they're not going to start their 2020-21 season until they can have crowds in. So they're looking at December for that, which is interesting. But you read criticism all the time of the RFL. Why haven't they made a decision? Why haven't they said this? Why haven't they done that? It does look from the outside, and I have sympathy. No one knew what was going to happen this year. Go back to February, and the biggest thing we were talking about was Izzy Folau signing. And now we're talking about maybe he knew. He moves in mysterious ways, doesn't he? That's what.
Maybe he's the cause. Maybe because we signed him, it all came crashing down.
I hope people realise I'm being facetious there. So I understand, obviously, before the start of the season, before even anyone knew what coronavirus was, let alone COVID-19, I can understand why, that some clubs in the Championship spent money, gambled, if you will, on signing players on full-time contracts to get them into Super League. No one could have known what was going to happen. And from my perspective, we can't hold the sport ransom to one or two people who may have more money than another club in their division. And if they are threatening to walk away, as some would say, it goes back to a couple of years ago when similar happened and we were told, oh, well, we need to keep X person and Y person in the sport because they've got money. But if they are willing to walk away, do we really need to keep them in the sport? How does the Championship and League One resume, John, when there's no money coming in?
Well, I've been saying it for a while. I mean, obviously it's because the situation with COVID could change and we could have games with fans in or limited fans in. But I think, you make the decision to cancel the season. If the situation changes, maybe you start the next season early, maybe you start in December, maybe you start in November, or you start playing friendlies then. And that could dovetail with the Super League season ending, and you might actually get, more crowds at Championship and League One than we have previously. But we do have a World Cup next year, which is really important, and a lot of those Championship and League players, League One players, some of them will play for nations playing in the World Cup. So to give them a break would be good. But yeah, it just shows how reliant the Championship and League One is on match day income, on people going to the game, with their season tickets or buying pies or pints, and shirts, etc. And without that, you don't really have a sport or a sustainable business.
I think there's two things as well. One is something is wrong with our sporting model, as it is with most sports. If keeping your assets on furlough is more financially viable than playing. So we've got to a point where for a lot of the clubs in the Championship and League One, not playing is more economically viable than playing. That can't be right. Something is clearly wrong there. Now, it's nobody's fault, but clearly the model isn't working if for a number of clubs they don't want to go back because economically it's more beneficial for them not to. So I think that needs looking at, and all of the things that we talked about in the last half an hour or so comes into that discussion about, what do we expect from our clubs? What can we expect? I think there's an issue as well about welfare. It's in some ways you can make a case for playing a lot of games very quickly with guys whose sole income is to be professional rugby league players, where there is a squad of up to 30 players and you can rotate them and it's what they do, and they're going to get tested to a point that perhaps part-time players aren't, because the money's going to have to be there to test them. They're going to be able to get the best rehab. They're going to get 24/7 looking after. That doesn't happen in the Championship and League One. They're part-time players who cannot afford to come under any form of risk that might affect their full-time employment. And one of the things that we do know, and very, very interesting to see what's happening in Victoria at the moment, because if the NRL hadn't got Melbourne out of there quickly and up into Queensland, then I don't know what the implications would have been for the NRL continuing if members of that Melbourne squad had suddenly been found to have had a positive COVID test. Because not only does it affect them not being able to play, it affects the opponents that they're played against. It affects the people that they come in contact with at the club. Now, all it needs, because, we don't have a proper track, test and trace system here, and it's not a political point. We just don't. It's not something we've done very well. Other countries have invested far more in than we have. So we get an outbreak, let's say like a Leicester that's in lockdown at the moment, but it's in Batley, or it's in Bradford, or it's in Sheffield, or it's in Swinton. Materially, we've gone back to a point where do we have to close back down again? And economically, that's even worse than starting up for the wrong reasons. And I just don't think as a nation we're at a point yet where we can say we're clear to start spectators coming back to events. We're clear for players to start training and running the risk then of perhaps contracting the virus and taking it back into their club before they're ready to play. To all of that, I think, is an issue that the Championship and League One clubs have to face up to. There's a real concern, I think, that you look at Australia, it's a different country and it's different borders, different landscape. But the total number of deaths in Australia has been 125. Now, today, this country had more than 125 deaths. So, I've been impressed with the way the NRL have started up. I've been impressed with the leadership that Peter V'landys has shown. I've been impressed with the money that they've invested in keeping players in bubbles and moving teams and taking over the transport of teams. We can't do any of that. We can't afford to do any of that. We are at risk. And I just think the fact that the soccer teams in League One and League Two, who were virtually at the end of their season, decided that they couldn't afford to continue. We're at the beginning of our season. I don't think we can afford to start. And that's nothing to do with whether Derek Beaumont's invested in his team, and that's nothing to do with whether Featherstone think that they have a right to play for promotion. It's purely to do with the fact that I genuinely don't think it's safe to go back yet.
You talk about promotion. We're not going to have relegation, though, are we, John?
I couldn't think so. I mean, if you're Toronto or Catalans and you're not allowed to play at home and it is a reduced fixture list, you'd have a pretty good case to sue. A very good case, and obviously that could cripple the whole competition, the whole sport. And I think it would be very unfair to relegate a team when you're not allowed to play, at home or not allowed to fill out a full fixture list. I mean, no one could see this whole COVID situation happening. It's terrible, but we have to face the reality of it. And if this year or this season is a write-off in some ways, and it is, if it's an asterisk season, it's an asterisk season. And next year we have promotion relegation. I think there's probably good reasons not to have a promotion relegation at all, but we weren't going to talk about that today. But yeah, I think for a number of reasons we should put it on hold for this year.
There's another major economic reason why we won't have relegation, and that is suddenly now Toronto are every one of the 11 other teams' best friend. So they started off with a little bit of scepticism, but Toronto do not take a penny. So if they were to be the team to be relegated...
Phil, as Steve Mascord revealed with an interview with David Argyle last week, they want TV.
They want to, yeah, but at the moment there is an agreement that says they don't. Now, whether they can challenge that. But what I'm saying is if they were to get relegated at the end of this truncated 2020 season and a Lee or a Featherstone or a Bradford or a Toulouse or whoever come up, they immediately will get, under the terms of the agreement, a 12th of the monies that are going. Therefore, all the 11 other clubs will be paying something in that they don't currently pay, that they don't have. So there is an economic reason as well as a moral reason to say you cannot have relegation. If you can't have relegation, you can't have promotion. The two go together. But I think John's right. The conversation we should be having is, does promotion relegation suit rugby league? And this is a time to say, look, how do we get out of this? What does the future look like?
I think this is the thing that's really annoyed me to an extent. Well, not really, because everything annoys me, doesn't it? But we spoke at the start of this whole situation that we had a perfect opportunity to get a blank piece of paper and map out potentially where rugby league could go going forward. And we've moved forward, it seems, 0 steps in this time. We're just back to infighting, players versus clubs, and I'll get back to that point in a moment. But we might have had an opportunity to change things, but unless it's forced on us, we're going to be back to the... I have this awful feeling that we're going to be back to the same situation again, and we'll just rebuild that house on sand. And I don't want to use Bradford as an example for obvious reasons, but we'd never learned from any of those issues at Bradford. as we've mentioned a million times on this programme. And here's an opportunity for the whole sport.
There is a case for saying the exact reverse may happen. And that is that the only times you tend to get change in sport, but particularly rugby league, and it's been brought home to me a bit by editing Tony Collins' latest book, which is out within a month, that, you know, all of the problems that we face are problems that we faced before. Nothing is new. COVID might be new, but the problems it throws up are not new. And when there has been... Oh, John's fallen over.
Again.
With shock. When there's been change, it's come about because the clubs are effectively weaker or powerless, normally economically. So that the change that I can remember the most is the early 70s. Obviously, neither of you were born at the time, but that just makes me feel even older. But, you know, when Messrs Oxley and Howes came in the 73-74 season, the game was virtually bankrupt. You know, there were no sponsors, there was no television money, there were no crowds. You know, so I've used the example before, but Leeds won the championship in 1972, and their average crowd, as the highest supported club, was 4,000.
So it was great in the olden days.
It was an unsustainable sport. But we got some new leadership, but we got clubs that said, basically, you've got carte blanche to do whatever you want, because we need to be told. We can't bring anything to the party other than our debt. So whatever you want to do, we're going to have to support you. And, you know, from little acorns, within 10, 15 years, we did have 80,000 people at Wembley watching Great Britain be very competitive in an Ashes series against Australia and go within 5 minutes of winning a World Cup, and household names, and, you know, thousands of people outside of the core of the support actually knowing who the main superstars were, and grandstand suddenly taking another interest in the sport and putting it on a Saturday. It can be done, but it does need the clubs to be weak. And I think the one thing this economic situation has done is it's weakened the clubs. Now, I wouldn't want any of them to be lost because they're weak, but I do think that there will be things going on behind the scenes talking about, you can't really have a sphere of influence anymore because there's nothing you can really bring to the table.
Well, sorry, Phil.
Whilst that is very naive and idealistic of me to think that there are people out there that can steer us through these stormy waters, I do think it's encouraging. And again, I go back to, I think John's take on this is far more important than mine, because he's got really good contacts in Australia. But when I see that debate is happening in a three-cornered way between the RFL, the Commission and the International Board on how a more aligned season might look, and there's talk of people working together, I think that's a step forward going on behind the scenes. There isn't going to be an announcement that, you know, for the next 5 years Super League is going to look like X and the Championship's going to look like Y. That isn't going to happen. But I get the feeling that people who would otherwise have carried on as if nothing was going to change are realising that everything is up for grabs, and that they are talking to each other at the moment. I don't know if you've heard anything, but clearly the NRL.com site put out a report in the last couple of days that they were looking at the structure of the season, and that might be initially for them around where Origin is situated, but what can we do if we put Origin here that impacts more on the wider international game, that gets more kids playing in the South Pacific, that gets Rugby League as a sport of choice. Interesting that some women's players both over here and over there that played rugby union, and you know, Wigan have signed a rugby union player today, and I think the 3 or 4 NRL rugby union sevens players in Australia are thinking of playing in the women's NRL. I think if we're clever, and if we do talk to each other at the very highest level, we can bring about change. And if the season is shortened over there, the season will be shortened here. And that initiative may not come from reluctant chairman here who would still want perhaps a longer season with more games. It might be that that's what they're forced into doing. And I actually have some hope that there will be change.
Yeah, hope's nice. I haven't heard anything specifically, but I think, talk about sort of the economic reasons before, I think it was interesting to note the sort of push to end the split and essentially get rid of Robert Elston, which was, I think, reported as a 7-5. And obviously that would save a lot of money if it went back to just being the RFL and no separate Super League body. But I just going on what you said there, Phil, and obviously Phil Gould had floated the idea of the NRL buying Super League and controlling, which I don't think will happen, and I don't think it's probably a good idea for a number of reasons. But certainly greater cooperation internationally would be good, and there's lots of benefits we could get from that. But maybe for the UK, maybe it's time for an independent commission. So instead of sort of being club-led and, we're having all these different agendas, we have, a group of 10 or 8, I don't know, independent people, who are perhaps outside the game or not directly linked to it at the moment, who are just there for the good interest of the game, who are governing. Because, that system does work in other sports and does seem to work in the NRL so far. It's not perfect, but we don't have, club owners perhaps having as much sway as they should.
And the RFL board would tell you they are exactly that, independent people, and I think it is moving that way. We did a long interview with Simon Johnson in the previous issue, and again, if he can deliver on his philosophy, that's exactly what you're talking about: independent, self-confident, prepared to make the difficult decisions, with a vision for how the sport can look. Now, I think there are people now coming into the sport after this World Cup in 2021. There's going to be some very, very capable administrators who are going to be on the market. Now, there is a case for saying that if we, again, act in a proactive rather than a reactive manner, we're already making positions for the likes of John Dutton in taking the game forward once his World Cup duties are finished. We missed that opportunity in 2013. There were people saying, "Oh, when does Sally Bolton come in and run the game, or when does John Dutton get a position in the sport?" Because they, by everyone's admission, had run the most successful World Cup we'd ever see commercially. Those people are going to be available. They understand and they know rugby league. This is only going to be, at a time when the television deal has been renegotiated. I think that, again, if these discussions are taking place about what we want to look like and who we want to run the ship, they're already there. It's just how do we integrate them? And anyway, Robert Elston can be the chief executive of Wigan Athletic when Wigan RL buy it.
Well, they've just beaten the whole City 8-0 today. It's like a rugby score there at the Pie Dome.
Well, they've already bought them then. Wigan have bought them. They get a rugby score.
Our friend will be very happy with that one, won't he? Mr. Bennett. Yeah.
Mr. Bennett might even go out. He'd be that happy.
Thanks for saying it can be done, because it always reminds me of that big picture of Ken Bates that used to be on the wall at Radio Yorkshire. And also printing the best rugby picture ever, which is the Dreadnoughts is Coming, which is my favourite picture of all in the history of Rugby League, with the winners of the Challenge Cup back in 1909. It's been a while since we've done that, though. Congratulations, Tom Coyne, new coach in the England wheelchair team, head of the World Cup next year. We are all looking forward to that. And obviously, every game on the BBC in some form or another is great news for the sport. Are we going to be back on August 2nd, or will the players be on strike, John? What have you heard on that one? 6 clubs apparently have all signed up, 6 yet to make the necessary arrangements.
Well, I think it's at least 7 now. I think Hull KR today have agreed. I think Salford were meeting the union and getting their offer today, so I've not heard anything whether that's been agreed. But I think we will. I think it'd be a massive disaster if we weren't playing again on the 2nd. I think it will get sorted. But the positive, I think, out of this situation is that the players have probably realised the power they have. Like the kind of union has generally been a non-event, at least in recent years. But they do seem to have a voice now, and they are, a player. And I think that's a player, in the power system. And I think that's a positive thing, because I think for far too long they've sort of been told what to do, and you're going to play this many games or whatever. And now they're actually saying, well, hang on, we can have our say, and we should have our say. And I think that's a real positive out of this tough situation.
Yeah, Sam Tompkins not happy about the rule changes. Jackson Hastings not happy about all these games played on one pitch. as we've seen with the problems in Australia. Hope get well soon, Josh Hobson, of course, and hopefully he has a quick recovery. But it does seem that way, Phil, doesn't it? As John mentions, that the players perhaps realising now that they need to spend more time on actually coming together about these issues, because as we've seen in the past, it seemed to me from the outside that the last attempt of the union was just an attempt to get cheap cars or free coffee or whatever, and not actually do anything to improve their lot in the sport.
I think the one thing that the GMB always had that any other organisation didn't was the backing of a major union. So it had resource, it had access to legal advice, it had people who were skilled in employment negotiation. It wasn't just a group of players that said, we want more say. Well, what skills have you got? Well, we just want more say. I think it goes back to something that our good friend Rod Studd always used to say, and great to be able to report that he is slowly but surely on the mend, and I'm sure not only do we all send our constant good wishes to him, but anybody who is listening to this or watching this, I'm sure you'll join us in that. And Scoey's just texted saying send his love to everybody as well, especially John, and remind him that it wasn't that long ago that we won the World Cup. 50 years is nothing. I think the players having a voice again is another positive to come out of this. And as Rod used to say, they have the ultimate in that they can withdraw their labour. Now, it was always a situation where it was master and servant. So, I think there was a reluctance to withdraw their labour, because I think they were conditioned that they were told to turn up and play and had things provided for them, and so they couldn't rage against the machine, as it were. Now they've got the chance to do that, and they've shown that they do have a say, and that things like collective bargaining agreements are very, very important in all walks of life, and looking after conditions of employment is massive. And again, however we move forward, it has to be with the players, and we should never forget that the players have taken a major cut in wage to keep their clubs going, and I that is immensely commendable. Going back to what the issue you just raised about the number of injuries in the NRL and playing a lot of games on the same grounds, I'd be really concerned about that at the moment, mainly because we are going to be playing more games over a shorter space of time on the same ground. So if there is going to be any issue about wear and tear on pitches, it's going to be a hell of a lot worse than they have been at Bankwest Stadium or wherever it might have been, because we could be playing midweek matches. I think the other thing is it conservatively estimated that 25 million Australian dollars worth of talent is on the sidelines at the moment through injury. So not only are we in danger of some of our top players being injured, coming back and not being used to the contact, but we again are going to be playing more games in a lesser space of time, which increases the incidence of injury. We got to be so careful in how we monitor this. And I watched a tiny bit of football, and they're coming back there playing every 3 or 4 days. It's mainly an athletic thing with them, but they've had more soft tissue injuries than they would normally have during a season. So we've got to be very, very aware that we need to look after the players first and foremost, and we can't be giving them a schedule that is going to physically damage and ensure that they're not around when it really matters for next season.
I know people get excited about fixture lists coming out. I don't generally, but we are just waiting still for that list to come out, which there obviously are things to be sorted which have prevented that from happening. And I guess we are going to see a lot of games at Headingley coming up, or at hub venues, it seems to be.
I think, Headingley, Saints, Salford and Warrington are the hub venues so far. I think Catalan have made a case for saying we can have more spectators in than anybody else, so we want not only more home games, but you should even think about flying sides out to play it as a double header at our ground. I think there's some reluctance from our sides to fly at the moment, so there's still a bit of negotiating with television. There's also a decision to be made about games that aren't going to be on television. How are fans going to be having access to those? If they're going to be streamed, who's going to pay for that? Where are they going to be shown? Do season ticket holders get them for free? Everybody else has to pay a little bit. All of that, I think it's not quite as simple, and I wouldn't be an administrator at the moment, but we should Get them by Thursday at the latest.
Just to mention, guys, there's a breaking story in the Mirror by Gareth Walker. Visa issues for Sonny Bill Williams and co. threatens to curtail Toronto Wolfpack's 2020 season. The Canadian club's 7 overseas players, including superstar Sonny Bill Williams, are all on visas that limit them to 6 months a year in the UK. And the owner, David Argyle, has confirmed that the club's long-standing visa issues could mean they could not fill the Super League season.
That would be a reason why fixtures hadn't come out as well.
Well, I mean, not to say I told you so, but I did write a piece a year ago, revealing that they were on tourist visas and they can't get full work permits because they are a Canadian club. They're not sponsored by the RFL, and this could come to bite them on the arse, and it sounds like it has.
I don't know.
Whether the RFL could now agree to sponsor them and that would solve the issue, I'm not sure.
I don't think they can, Phil, because they're not an English club, are they? I mean, it's up to the Canadian government to sponsor them, but the problem is they're a Canadian club that's based in England, isn't it?
Yeah, you and I. Everyone knows they're based in Manchester. Everyone knows they are Manchester Wolfpack, and they occasionally play games in Canada.
But as I know, as an Australian, you can get a tourist visa where you can stay for 6 months in the UK in a year period. But obviously, you have to leave the country. But I haven't been able to leave the country to go and play in Canada because of the coronavirus. So the thing is, they've known about this since day one, which it's kind of just been ignored. But it's kind of blowing up in their faces now.
Well, the players can all get jobs working for Amazon or Hermes or whatever it is, and filling the gaps while they can't play. Oh no, they can't because they can't get visas, can they?
Unless their employers sponsor them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh dear. I'm trying to think of anything else we need to speak about, and there was one thing which this is you've upset people, Phil, on the internet because because you are woke. 4020 magazine, it might as well just say woke. Social Justice Warriors Monthly on it. Woke Rugby League. Look at that. Black Lives Matter we did last time, and now you're saying that we should rename the Man of the Match award at the grand final, which for 99% of people who probably go to the grand final, including myself, don't even know who Harry Sunderland is anyway.
I'm not saying we should definitely rename it. I'm saying that we should discuss the possibility of renaming it in the light of there are a lot of institutions at the moment looking at things like statues that have been put up, names that have been given to places, in the light of the fact that history is an ever-changing feast. And what we know about Harry Sunderland and what we know about the person who I've suggested isn't recognised enough in the sport, who is Roy Francis, the father of modern coaching in both sides of the world, is a debate that we should have. I'm not suggesting in any way whatsoever that Harry Sunderland's name shouldn't stay on that trophy. And it may well be that the compromise is that Roy Francis gets a trophy named after him. What I'm saying is that there are allegations, some of which can be proven, from admittedly a lot of sources going back to the 1930s that are hearsay of players and administrators at the time, that there is an allegation against Harry Sunderland, who was a journalist and administrator that came over from Australia, where they operated a very stringent whites-only policy at the time, that one of the reasons that Roy Francis was allowed to be let go from Wigan as a teenager, even though his record would indicate that he was worthy of a place in the team, was a racial undertone. But the story of Roy Francis is bigger than that. It's all about his contribution to the sport. I think that there were 3 instances in his life where his colour of skin stopped him getting the recognition he deserves. One was that he wasn't allowed to go on the 1946 Indomitables tour when he was clearly one of the form wingers in the competition, to the effect that the following year in 1947 he did get the cap that he deserved, and we laud the fact that he was the first black player to play for Great Britain. Well, he should have gone on that tour, but again, not wanting to upset Australians when the war had just finished and this was a tour to build bridges, they didn't want to take anybody of colour because of the whites only policy that was being operated in Australia. Then he went to North Sydney in the late 60s, when the game here was deemed to be ahead of that in Australia, people were looking at what Roy Francis had done as the most innovative coach in the world at the time in Rugby League, and North Sydney took him on, initially on a trial period in the summer in 1968. He helped them win 3 games when I think they'd only won 1 in the entire season, and they invited him back on a 3-year contract thereafter. And people like Frank Stanton, I think, looked at him and what he was bringing in and said, this is the guy who is the father of modern coaching. Now, if you look into the Roy Francis story, which is actually what I've written about in the magazine, it's all about how, because he was in the army as not just a fitness instructor, his job was to rehabilitate soldiers who've been wounded. So he took a holistic approach, and it wasn't just about mending the bone that had broken, it was about mending the person. And he took that into coaching. So he was the first to involve wives and girlfriends as well as players. He was the first to video games and have analysis after them. He was the first to introduce sprint training. There were loads of things that he did that people now look back on and say that's the norm, but where did it start? And it started with Roy Francis. So my argument is, yes, he's black, but yes, he's also the most innovative coach that changed the face of the game. When the 1982 Kangaroos came here, it was the biggest kick up the arse that this country had ever had, because the Australians were playing a game that we didn't recognise, that was still called Rugby League. They had levels of fitness and preparation, even as part-time players, that we were so far off at the time. Roy Francis was the same, and he instituted a lot of what came back and bit us in those days, and we don't recognise him anywhere. He took Hull as a coach to Wembley twice. He won the championship twice with them. He rebuilt completely the Leeds team and the philosophy of the Leeds team that won everything in the late 1960s. He was, you speak to any player who played under him, be it Johnny Whiteley at Hull or John Atkinson at Leeds, and the one word they immediately use about Roy Francis was that he was revolutionary. But we don't recognise him. They don't recognise him in Wales. We don't recognise him here. We need to do something to redress that. Now, one of the ways we could do that would be to change the name of the trophy that's after somebody who perhaps didn't give him the opportunity to shine, but it's more a debate about if we're serious about racism. And John's written a brilliant piece about racism that you
about to mention that, yeah.
I think it's published today in its longest form. We don't do enough. We pay token to being an all-inclusive sport, and we're not. And one of the things we could do, amongst a lot of other things we need to examine, is the role of somebody like Roy Francis. And that was why I wrote it, and that's why I wanted a debate to be had.
Just to make a point on that, and I agree with you, Phil, I think it should be renamed. I didn't know until I saw the Codebreakers documentary on BBC. I knew nothing about Roy Francis. I don't think his story or his status is well known enough, not only in the UK but in the Southern Hemisphere as well. I knew nothing about him, and he's essentially, as you've pointed out, he's kind of the Jack Gibson of the English game, and he should have that exalted status, and he should have a lot of things named after him, but he doesn't. He was a trailblazer as a player and as a coach. Just obviously a revolutionary. So we should really be celebrating him and his achievements.
We don't do well for naming things over here for some reason. I don't know.
Journalists shouldn't get anything named after.
Exactly, and that is the thing. We've, with the greatest respect to the contribution that the players made, both of our major individual awards on the field are named after administrators, and both of them are foreigners. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that there is a case for saying that there are people within our, Clive Sullivan, should have been knighted in virtually every other sport, even, posthumously. There should be some recognition of the fact that we won the World Cup in 1972, and he was the first black captain of any British team to win a World Cup.
Yeah,
we know that, and naming a road after him in Hull is fine, but it's not enough.
It gets mentioned on radio too every so often, doesn't it? When there's roadworks or something, that's great recognition. As Sky will always say, and people will disagree with him about 1,000,001 things, but he always says we don't do enough about the history of the sport, and he's exactly right. And Hopefully the new museum, when it's built at the George, will rectify that somewhat. We will see. Before we wrap up, and unless you can think of anything else, Rugby League is going to be back soon. I can't see myself going to a game unless I'm needed to be there. I've seen all the football on TV, and the amount of journalists who've been there on social media. I think you don't need to be there. All the football's on telly. You can work at home. Don't go out. Don't put stress on the nation's resources and the people who we've been clapping who are getting abused now, and it's ridiculous. But August the 2nd, Emerald Headingley Stadium. It will return. Are you looking forward to it?
It's funny you should say that. As most people know, we have a retail arm, and we've been subject to same restrictions as everybody else. We had to close when we were told to. We had to reopen when we were told to. We had to put in restrictions that we were told to. We now got to wear masks from next week. And when we reopened, there was a mixture of real excitement to get back to doing what we want to do and a tiny bit of trepidation. I'm going to feel the same when Rugby League restarts. I can't wait, but something in the back of my mind is gnawing at me saying, I just hope that we're not doing this too early.
Yeah, I agree with Phil. Really looking forward to the season restarting. I don't think it is too early, but I guess history will judge us, won't it? If there's a second spike, and who knows what the future will bring. But I think it'll be great to have games back. It's been really enjoyable what the NRL's been doing, and hopefully Super League can come back with a similar kind of punch. And I think the 6 again rule, which is coming to Super League, has been a real winner in terms of the standard of games. So hopefully we see the same in Super League.
Forwards, though, not happy about the cancellation of scrums. In this cancel culture, scrums, which have been a disgrace in rugby league since, the 1960s, possibly. Which was the year that you was on? Was it 71 when Alex Murphy cheated, Phil? You'll know.
66, I think.
66.
The Challenge Cup final.
Scrums have been a disgrace for a long time. So forwards aren't happy, but everyone else is going.
Read what Brian Noble says. There are certain things in the game that have nothing to do with backs. You need a little bit of space where the forwards can take care of themselves. So leave the scrum. One thing that has worked in Australia, I think, hasn't had the same publicity, is choosing where you can take the scrum. You can move it in field, or you can have 20. I think we've had some fantastic, exciting attacking play off the back of people deciding where they want the scrum to pat down. I'd keep it for that reason.
I know whether they play this year or not, but Tim Sheens loves the scrum play. So if you're playing against Widnes and there are, scrums, you'd be expecting a few trick shots coming off the back of that.
Luke Thompson at Canterbury. I thought Brisbane was supposed to be the worst team in the world, and then they go and beat Canterbury. Poor old Luke. But he had a go. He had a dig.
Yeah, I haven't heard. Has he got a ban for his?
No, he got off.
Good. Well, he's reinforced the stereotype about British forwards, which is great.
Yeah, I thought he played really well. I think he only played 60 minutes. You probably even expect him to play more than that regularly. But the best bit was the duel with him and Pangai Jr., which they probably played against each other when Great Britain played Tonga in Hamilton last year. But it seemed like every set they just tried to smash the living tripe out of each other, and there was sledging and love taps and shoulder charges. It was great. And at the end of the game, they shook hands and had some nice words. That's rugby league to a T, isn't it? I thought it was fantastic. And, he's definitely come into the NRL because of some of the hype and justified hype around him as the best prop in Super League. He's got a bit of a target on his back, but he's got to rise to that level. And, yeah, I'm sure he will.
The Living Tripe might be the new name of this program. We might change it.
I love that. I think that's the marketing slogan they'd be looking for. Never mind, every minute matters. Living Tripe. That's it.
Well, I was going to say something else, but it's a PC program, so.
Well, I'm not sure. Carrie Schofield's been on this program since pretty much we started.
Vision, awareness.
Vision and awareness. He'll be back. He'll be back. Is there anything you're working on, John, that you can tease? I know you obviously don't want to spoil anything, but
well, I just heard about the Toronto thing, and then saw that the story had already become. So
that must be really annoying now, yeah.
But no, I did hear about another company that's apparently owed money by Toronto. So that's another
one.
Another situation. But yeah, not that I can think of. Yeah, just obviously that the racism story that I put up today, which is obviously it's not having a dig at the sport, because as Phil said, we actually have been trailblazers when you look at Clive Sullivan, Roy Francis, even Artie Beetson in Australia. But there are still issues, like every other sport, and in society around racism. And you look at these players and coaches have been speaking out, like Jermaine Coleman and Leroy Cudjoe and Jordan Turner, about their experience, which just goes to show we still have a way to go, and hopefully we can continue to do that and not rest on our laurels of the past.
It's not just rugby league. Just so people don't think we're having a go at rugby league. It's society as a whole. As we've seen in football at the weekend, it's just utterly ridiculous. But that's the internet. Phil, the magazine's out. Obviously, I've got it here.
Yes.
Plenty of new books coming soon. One about Batley.
Yes, due in later this week, all being well.
And the Rugby League of People's History by Professor Tony Collins, which you mentioned, which are extracts within the latest issue of the magazine, and the Runcorn book, which has been out for a month or two now. So plenty of rugby league reading. If you're still having to shield or stucking, there are still plenty of good rugby league books from Scratchy Said Publishing available now.
Very kind of you.
There you go. That's my advertising. Gents, thank you very much for your time. I'm not sure when we'll be back again, because I don't know when we will be, but it will be at some point before the season resumes, because we'll have to do the predictions, because people want to know, how do you predict teams who haven't done anything and they may have different training schedules? We don't know, but we'll work it out.
The only prediction I know is Manly will probably lose.
Oh,
and I've only come on today because Brisbane finally won.
Yes, the Broncos were able to beat the worst team in the NRL. Anthony Seibold is a genius.
Our message is, everyone behave. Don't make sure there's not a second spike, otherwise that's the end of rugby league as we know it completely. And if you are a player, don't attempt to kiss any sideline reporters, otherwise you'll be in a bubble forever, and that'll be it for you. They're not going to just. In fact, that's a good message for us. Stay away from players, because you don't know what they're going to be like.
So basically,
certainly don't kiss them.
And Costa.
Yeah, don't go to Costa. Don't go to Nando's. Don't go to rugby league. Stay at home, listen to the games or whatever's left of radio, and watch the games on TV. And we'll see you again soon here on 4020, not live.